You find me a tad south of Cliddesden station. Now in front of us is the cutting, which would have accommodated the running line, single running line, and also the siding, which would have gone round the back of Cliddesden platform. Now you can see where that tree is, just behind the telegraph pole. That's about the edge of the cutting, so it's quite a wide one. The station would have been the other side of that hedge, to the left of that large tree. Now looking south towards Herriard, obviously that house in front of us wouldn't have been there. That's a modern addition, so let's move on. I'm leaving Cliddesden behind me and travelling south. On my left is the track bed on what I'd always assumed was at the same height as the path I'm walking along now. I'm heading towards that line of trees and bushes in front of me, which leads from left to right at the bottom of the slope in the field. That is Hackwood Lane, where, again, I'd always assumed that a bridge took the railway across the road. However, I think there may be a bit of an anomaly here. This is the aforementioned Hackwood Lane. At this point, where it would have encountered the railway, the road dips from the west. Now looking up there, we clearly have what looks like the top of an embankment, which is probably what gave me the impression that the railway always crossed Hackwood Lane via a bridge. You can see there, as we look to the west, how the road sinks as well. Now looking on the other side of the road, there's absolutely no indication of an embankment. I'd always assumed that that had been cleared away for some reason or other. So just what was going on here? How did the line pass through? Was it a bridge or a level crossing? I moved a few yards into the trees on the south side of the road, and I found what looks like it could be a shallow cutting. You can see the edge there, the other side there. Can't see anything behind me, it's too dense. But you can see the road, and it's just there. So I'm pretty level with the road, and that would seem to get rid of the bridge theory. So we've got an embankment on one side and a cutting on the other side of the road. We've got a bit of a mystery here. Let's have a look at this and see if I can clear it up. Before turning to the internet, I opened up the Basingstoke and Alton Light Railway book by Martin Dean, Kevin Robertson and Roger Simmons. Now in there is a chart showing a list of bridges. Now if Hackwood Lane had a bridge, it would be found between number 4 Cliddesden Road and number 5 Swallock. But as you can see, there's clearly no bridge marked, so according to this, there is no bridge. Now next, I'll read you a couple of lines from a short excerpt from the book. It says, leaving the station, that's Cliddesden, the line crossed Hackwood Lane by a level crossing. So there we have it in printed text, that it was clearly a level crossing and not a bridge. I'll now turn to a chart showing mileage, gradient and curvature of the line. Now Cliddesden station is clearly marked in the centre of the chart. Below it are two X's just above the line. They denote level crossings. Now the left hand one is the station level crossing, and can we assume the right hand one is that crossing Hackwood Lane, which makes the level crossing theory pretty much overwhelming. If we take a look at the line below, this shows gradients. Slightly below the gradient line, you'll notice a number of elongated lowercase letter n's. These denote the location of bridges and can be referenced to the list of bridges chart shown previous. If you look for a bridge on the gradient line below the area of Hackwood Lane, there is clearly no bridge, which concurs with the bridge list and more or less clarifies things. Here we see another map from the National Library of Scotland site. Now this one's dated 1932, so the passenger service had just finished, but the goods service was still running. Now look at the point where Hackwood Lane meets the railway line. Now look at that carefully. Does that look like a bridge Does look a bit like a bridge to me.
So to sum up, I think that the embankment on the north side of Hackwood Lane is a later addition, constructed sometime after the railway closed and it had been cleared away, which sort of ties up a bit as out of view behind it is a small industrial complex. I think it's clear that there was a level crossing here, but the modern day geography makes that hard to see.
As for the alleged bridge on the map, I clearly have no explanation for that. But one final piece of proof, if any were needed, is this still from the film Oh Mr. Porter. Despite being grainy, it shows beautifully the cutting heading south away from Cliddesden, and in the top right hand corner is Hackwood Lane level crossing. I'm now east of the trackbed, still on Hackwood Lane, and the level crossing I was investigating can be found through those trees. You can see the alignment as it moves south, denoted by the tree line, and from the level crossing it quickly becomes an embankment in order to traverse the large dip visible in the field. In the summer it's impenetrable, however in the winter I managed to have a wander along it. Unfortunately I only had my phone at the time, so please excuse the narrow screen. A short distance away, after a walk along Swallock Farm Lane, I arrive at another bridge. Yes, this one is definitely a bridge. Crossing a farm entrance road, the abutments to Swallock Bridge still remain and are in good condition. Although almost completely hidden beneath undergrowth, glimpses of brickwork are still visible. Carrying on from Swallock Bridge, there is a good distance of bridleway which follows the trackbed, first on an embankment, then entering quite a deep cutting. It's here that we get a good idea of just how much the gradient rose. Although not being able to continue any further, which is frustrating, as ahead is a perfectly usable path upon the trackbed which continues via an impressive embankment. There is still much to see in this area. The bridleway descends down the very steep embankment and my bike ride isn't quite over. Take a note of this building. We'll come back to that shortly. Okay, so coming into view now is a very impressive structure. This is Winslade Bridge and is the only fully intact structure, including bridges and everything, on the whole of the route. Constructed from blue and red engineering brick, Winslade Bridge, as can be seen from this still, is very wide. It's almost a tunnel. This is so as to accommodate at least another 10 feet of embankment on top before we reach the trackbed. Now, whilst having a look at the interior of the bridge, which in itself is in pretty good condition, we came across this intriguing engraved brick. What does that look like to you? Well, my own personal interpretation that it is 15 SEPT, 1 and then an 8 or a 9. So I think we're looking at a date, so I would interpret that as the 15th of September. And there's a 1 or an 8, so it could refer to 1899 or 1900. I'm saying that because it's during the building phase. So is that the date that the bridge was completed? I'd love to know. So it's time to move on to the next piece of accessible trackbed. But before I leave, let's have a look at that building I mentioned whilst coming down the slope from the embankment. Isn't that a wonderful old building sat out here all on its own in the middle of nowhere? Well, that is Winslade Congregational Chapel. Now, it was built in 1888, so it predates the railway by a good 12 years. And it seems a bit of an odd place to build a chapel. Well, it was built here as it was a meeting point of a number of pathways or minor roadways from Herriard, Winslade and Ellisfield, which were deemed not large enough to have their own chapels. However, despite being popular and well maintained, it was decided in 1930 to close this lovely little chapel over the winter period, and alas, it never reopened. But fortunately it still exists, and I believe today it's used by farmers for storage. Incidentally, the path that you can see to the right of the chapel is a slope that I came down on my bike from the top of the embankment, and it gives a good indication of just how steep it actually is. The next accessible area of the line on from Winslade is the site of Bushy Warren Lane level crossing. A little used road just off the A339 Basingstoke to Alton road. You can see where the crossing went through, just where that rise in the road can be seen. This view shows the trackbed as it heads towards Cliddesden, so going northbound. You can see the very pronounced dip in the ground, almost like a very shallow cutting as to where the track used to sit. Now, I visited this site a number of times because we found something rather interesting. In fact, you can just see one of them, that piece of rusting metal in the middle of the picture. And there's another 2 similar objects in the undergrowth there, but at the moment it's too dense to see. Fortunately, I filmed it when we found them, so let's have a look at our moment of discovery. Now, the flat piece of ground you can see between the trees, that is the trackbed heading towards Herriard. stonework there, look.
That's from it.
Yeah, I reckon it's been pushed over. Look, the railings are still into the brickwork.
Yeah.
See it?
Yeah. Is that more brickwork over there? Ahead of the railings.
Looks like it.
But I think you can see bricks in there.
Yeah, it is. There's bricks in there. So what had we found? Well, typically we hadn't carried out any research prior to our visit and initially thought we'd discovered some railings set into brickwork which were attached to a bridge that we believed crossed over the line at this point and had simply been discarded and the cutting filled in when the line was closed. After realising this was actually the site of a level crossing, we revisited and managed to clean our find up a bit. Regardless of this cleaning, we still couldn't work out what it was. Then it was revealed by the aforementioned book that Bushy Warren had no gates. All it had installed were cattle grids. Here you can see another one discarded in the bushes on the north side of the road. To get an idea of how cattle grids would have been used, I used this shot of a modern level crossing. The anti-trespass boards either side of the road are used in a similar way. Ultimately, I can't be 100% certain that these are the remains of the cattle grids situated here at Bushy Warren, but their condition certainly represents a metal item discarded some 85 years ago. And when you think about their location exactly on the point of the level crossing itself, it's hard to imagine what else they could be. And before we continue south on our push towards Herriard, let me show you another still from the film Oh Mr. Porter. And behind the carriage upon which Graham Moffat is clambering upon the roof, we see Bushy Warren Lane level crossing. Walking south again, the alignment of the route is discernible by an avenue through the trees and a very shallow cutting, and I'm now on my way towards Herriard. I think these contraptions that you can see to your, there's one on your right, there's a few scattered amongst the trees there for dormice or mice or so. Oh look, now, if I'm not mistaken, that is a fish plate. That's incredible. The discovery of that fish plate is indeed incredible, totally unexpected, and it's the first thing pertaining to the permanent way that we've found since Viable's roundabout. I'd like to think it's been resting there, discarded since at least 1936. And if you look at one end, it appears worn. Was it repurposed in some way and dropped here at a later date? Either way, it's a great discovery. So we're just a few hundred yards south of Bushy Warren Lane crossing. I've climbed up onto the embankment. See one side there, you can see through the trees into a farmer's field, but we can't go any further because there's a line of trees. However, we can go round because someone has had the great sense to build a footpath right on the track bed. Well done, that person. Okay, so before we continue our journey to Herriard, I think it's probably a good idea to refer back to our map, our National Library of Scotland map, just to get an idea of where we are. Now, if you look at the cursor, this is Great Bushy Warren Copse here. This map is dated after the line closed. I'm not quite sure the actual date, but it's after the line closed. But it does show the line, the alignment of the track quite well. So here's Great Bushy Warren level crossing just here, and then we came down here, and it was roughly here we found the fish plate, and then we moved along here. This small short embankment here, this is where our way was barred, and then we came out of there down, and then remember the footpath that I said had been built, that now starts around here and it comes along there on its way to Herriard. Now Herriard itself, there's a station there, and there's Herriard, the village. So you can see the distance, same as Cliddesden, the distance between the two is quite great, and that must have been a big inconvenience. Anyway, so we are around here, and let's continue our journey. So you can see the tree line here. That's where we've just come from. Bushy Warren Lane level crossing just down there. This is the remains of our embankment here, and it now peters out and goes into a field. But as I said earlier, someone has kindly decided to put a permissive footpath here which goes right along the old track bed, and so we're now heading towards Herriard. Interestingly, I'm walking upon a little raised area, like a low embankment, and it would be interesting to know if it was here when the railway ran through. So we're just arriving at Scratchface Lane. As I said earlier, there used to be an occupation crossing here. So the road down there, that takes you to the main Basingstoke to Alton road. Obviously nothing left to see today, so let's carry on towards Herriard. Right, we're coming into a bit of a clearing, and we also lose our track bed here. So the line itself, the large tree right in front of us, it went just to the right of that, and then the trees you can see in the distance, there's a bit of a gap between them. That's our track bed again, so technically it went straight across the field in front of us, but we've got to take a bit of a detour. Right, we're coming back onto the track bed again now. If you look over there where those hay bales in plastic are, that's where we've just come from. So the line would have come through the field, and we're now rejoining it. So here's the tree that I pointed out there. What's that? We've got a load of scrap metal. Or is it?
Looks like old rail. Looks like them miniature rails that they use for the construction.
Look at that. That looks like narrow gauge rail, doesn't it? Now I did read in the book, in the Basingstoke to Alton Light Railway book, that they did use narrow gauge rails. They repurposed them to use them as fence posts, and I know they exist around the Lasham area. But this looks like where they've dug the new path, as you can see there. Has this been dug up and just been thrown by the farmer? That is definitely rail, isn't it? Look at that. What a find.
Originally used in the construction of the line as well.
I don't know what that is. It's metal though.
Same as whatever that is. Or that, whatever that is.
That, I'd like to say is part of a train, but it looks
An old lamp holder or something.
too new. It's too usable as well. I think it's part of a tractor.
Yeah.
But that is definitely of the period, and that is a find and a half. And that's as good as the fish plate earlier. Well done, Tony. Now, just a quick note regarding the narrow gauge rails which we just found. Now, these were initially laid during construction of the Basingstoke to Alton line, and they conveyed narrow gauge trains to carry a number of materials to the construction site. Once the line was completed, much of this rail was cut into lengths, and it was repurposed as fence posts and laid along the line's perimeter. I'm on the final stretch now, approaching the site of Herriard level crossing and station. Going into these trees, I'm walking on a bit of an embankment, and what also looks interesting is a stone that has been laid for the new path Looks a bit like new ballast waiting for the track to be laid once again. So we're very close to the station, and I've just spotted another piece of rail there. You see it? That's well embedded in the ground. That's once again, well, you can see where they've cut the path out, it's been dug out. And that's be interesting to know whether that was used as a fence post or what. Got to keep your eyes open now because there's so much stuff around. So we're now coming up to Herriard. Let's cross over the old level crossing area. Coming through the kissing gate there, we got a good view of the railway cottages at Herriard. They're identical more or less to the ones at Cliddesden and indeed Lasham, where there's also another set. So I'm now on Bagmore Lane, about a mile or so outside of Herriard. There's a bit of a clue in front of me as to where we are, and there's a nice reminder there, a piece of rail sticking up out of the ground. I think that used to have a signpost attached to it. And right in front of me here is where the level crossing used to be. And down there are the remains of the platforms. So the first part of Herriard Station's coming into view now. You can see there quite clearly the concrete on the Alton bound platform. It's a little bit worn on the edges, but otherwise it's in pretty good condition. Moving further south, and the Basingstoke bound platform comes into view. Now the interesting thing there, that stopped being used in 1916 when the line was transferred to France for the war effort, and when it was reinstated it was only the Alton bound platform that was used right up until closure. So we've got a bit of a gap in the platform, and then it reappears, but it's under quite heavy undergrowth. So we've got it on both sides at the moment. It's slightly staggered as well. There's a glimpse of concrete through the undergrowth. But it's nice to know it's here. In fact, all the stations still exist. Cliddesden is just buried, but all of the stations still exist. There's a good view there with lots of ivy hanging over the edge. So we come to the end slope of the Alton bound platform now. But the Basingstoke side is still carrying on for a short distance. And there's the slope. And that's looking back towards Basingstoke. The platforms at Herriard, like Cliddesden, are constructed from concrete. The station differs, however, in that it was the only intermediate station on the line to have more than one platform, and was also the only passing place between Basingstoke and Alton. The track, as I said earlier, was lifted in 1917 and shipped to France to aid the war effort, and it wasn't until 1924 when it was relayed, and then only on the Alton bound platform. Right, so I've just come out of the station area a bit, and I've seen something, not this is something else. I wonder if that's anything to do with the station. A twisted piece of steel, rusted steel, looks quite old. There's another piece of rail, you see it in the trees there, narrow gauge rail. Well, what we saw from the other side is this piece of rusting metal. Now, is that a piece of a post, original post? Looks quite old. Yeah, you see it better from there. There's so much to find here at Herriard, and there's another piece of rail in there. There's so much narrow gauge rail now, it's starting to get boring. Let's get back to onto the platform. I'm back on the track bed once more and looking towards Basingstoke again, and I've just noticed another piece of rail sticking out of the ground. It's rounded off at the top, so it's probably used as a signpost or something. But looking at the maps, it says that the base of the water tower still exists. So let's go and have a look and see if we can find it. Now, I think it's over this it's definitely on the Alton side, and I've got a feeling it's around the electricity substation area. So let's have a look at that. Chances are it's probably bang in the middle of the electricity substation, or was. Let's have a scramble up the bank and see if we can find something. Well, I'm wondering, could it be here in the trees? I know that's somebody's property in there, so I don't want to go too far. I don't see anything. We've got the substation on our right, so there's nothing to see on there. We're coming to the, and that looks like some more rail. There's an old concrete post there. I wonder if that's anything to do with the railway. But we got some more of our narrow gauge rail there, look. And some more, in fact there is loads of it, look. It's the old fencing. In fact, there's so much of it now, it's starting to lose its appeal. Right, so we're walking down the perimeter of the electricity substation. There's another piece of rail there. There's another piece sticking out there, and another piece, but there's no sign of any. What's this in the trees? Brickwork. Brickwork. Now, is that the base of our water tower? It's got to be. That has to be. What do you think? Got to be. It's a little bit overgrown. I'm not getting in there. There's too many stingers. And there's that has to be the base of the water tower.
Yeah, look around here, it's small solid.
And we've even got the tank itself is gone, but the pipe seems to still remain going up into it used to go up into the tank. How brilliant is that? So I found it. Superb. And I've just been stung.